Hi, everybody. This is Gad Sad for the Sad Truth. I thought that today I would take a few minutes and discuss the scientific peer review process. Uh, Many non-academics might have heard the term, but you may not necessarily know the actual detailed mechanics of the process. And so I thought that I would spend a few minutes describing it. And so the process starts as follows. As an academic, you come up with an idea uh, worthy of further exploration. You set out to test your idea. You design the research instrument, you collect the data, you analyze the data, you write up the paper, and then at that point is where the review process starts. You might have already spent a year, 2, 3 years doing the research, and then the review process starts when you actually submit the paper to the journal of your choice. And so the first decision you have to make is which journal is appropriate for your paper. And there are different ways that you could tackle that decision. Once you submit the paper to the editorial office, the editor might decide to desk reject the paper. This happens when either the paper doesn't really fit, the content of the paper doesn't really fit with the mission of the journal or the scope of the journal, or because upon a perusal of your paper, the editor decides that it doesn't pass the quality level that is expected of that journal, and so he or she desk rejects it. In other words, it doesn't even go through the review process. Assuming that you clear that first step, the editor then has to decide to which reviewers the paper should be sent. Typically, the reviewers are chosen from a journal's editorial board, but sometimes the topic of your paper might contain might consist of an area of expertise, or might require an area of expertise that none of the editorial board members necessarily have, in which case the editor will look for an ad hoc reviewer. So a reviewer who is not on the editorial board, who can hopefully offer a good, an expert read of your paper. And sometimes you might also have an associated editor who is also involved in the process. And so your paper goes out, it takes a month or two hopefully, and then the reviews come back. The editor takes all of these pieces of information and then drafts a editorial decision letter with his or her position, along with all of the reviewer comments that were provided by each of the different parties who read and reviewed your paper. And so at this point, the editor can reject your paper, or you can go through what is called the R&R process, right? Revise and resubmit. Those could typically be minor revisions, which happens later in the review process, or they could be major revisions. Revisions could be things like, have you thought about controlling for this variable? What about ruling out this alternate explanation? So they could be methodological issues, they could be data analytic issues, they could be epistemological or theoretical issues. All possibilities exist. And then basically what happens, assuming that you've gotten a revise and resubmit, you take all of that information in. Hopefully you stay calm and collected. Oftentimes when, as academics, we spent years working on a paper, your first response is to, be upset, of course, and frustrated that, look, I have all this additional work that I have to handle. But very often the reviewers are quite right, are quite wonderful in how judicious they are in looking over your work. Not always, but many times. In which case, taking a step back, letting it sink in, and then coming back to your paper and their comments on your paper is a good idea, because it allows you to sort of reread their comments in a new spirit. And then you start implementing their changes. Sometimes you don't agree with those changes, in which case you can politely state why you think that you won't be implementing, suggestion X, and others you will implement. And so what you do is you basically go through, piecemeal, item by item, all of the things that have been requested of you. You implement those that you want. You don't the ones that you think you don't have to. And then you craft a reply letter to the editor, which will be circulated also to all of the reviewers, where you basically submit the revised paper and your response to all of the requirements. And that process goes typically through multiple rounds. So your paper could be in round 1, round 2, round 3. And so it could be quite an elaborate and punishing process, hopefully in most instances, the paper that you've ended up with ends up being stronger than the one that you started with. And so that's the process. It takes years, and frankly, at the end of it, none of us get richer. I mean, there are some schools that offer bonuses when you publish papers, and especially when you publish papers in certain journals that are prestigious. But most of us do what we do with no additional remuneration. It's part of our job. And really, we do it only for the love of hopefully discovering something new and exciting, sharing it with others, and for the joy of hopefully having people read your work and then using it in some constructive way in their own work, right? That's why we get excited when our colleagues cite our papers, because this means that hopefully we had something that was worthy of someone else being influenced by it. So there you have it. That's the peer review process. It's quite brutal. Just to give you a sense, many journals have rejection rates in the order of 90% plus. And I've known several very, very esteemed scientists who have told me privately that many of their papers get rejected, in the first round. And so there you have it. No one is outside the purview of the punishing corrective process of the peer review process. But as I said, it has its faults, but it's the best system that we currently have to ensure that the work that we put out there has been vetted. So there you go, folks. Please share this clip. And as I mentioned in my last video, the 200th show, please, if you can contribute through Patreon or through PayPal, that would be much appreciated. Talk to you soon. Ciao.